Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the final session 0 of the upcoming Describe Your Kill podcast, where we will be playing the Stolen Fate Adventure Path. If you've not listened to the other 3 sessions, then I highly advise you go back and do those. The first one was with Chris, who will be playing Malachi Bordello. The second one was with Matty Ryan, who will be playing Aaron Spokepoint, Aaron the Ashen. And most recently was with Kimone, who is playing Wilhelm Krongard in my best German accent. And with me tonight, I have the final player. The fourth piece of the puzzle is Mr. Jason Jones. Jason, good evening.
Ahoy, hoy.
How are you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. You are the third player to ask me how I am, and it's unusual. Because usually in our games, you're just like, right, how are we going to die tonight?
So, yeah, well, that's because there is no looming threat of you, destroying a character I've worked on for months. So, I'm interested in your well-being tonight.
This is a safe place, actually. I hadn't thought about it like that. This is a safe place for all the players where they know their death is not imminent. At least from dice. I mean, maybe.
What was I going to say?
At least from dice.
It's, the name of the show now takes on a whole different meaning.
So, Jason, we've obviously been playing since COVID. You were part of the original team. We
Indeed.
are, I guess, related somehow, not by blood, but you are my brother-in-law's brother. So, what does that mean?
It's Norfolk. It's a fairly,
cousins probably.
The family tree in Norfolk is a shrub, isn't it? It's,
that's true. Yeah, I don't know what that would make you. Brother-in-law removed.
God only knows. I mean, there's a
As
whole
you say,
podcast
it's
series
Norfolk,
in
so
that.
we probably are actually brothers. So it's fine. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into TTRPGs, how long you've played? Over to you. Tell us who you are.
Yeah, so I'm very much a card-carrying nerd, always have been. I've been probably playing RPGs in some description. I think Chris made mention of Baldur's Gate 2, I think.
Yes.
That was probably my introduction to RPGs proper. I think I spent an awful lot of time throwing myself into that game, despite not even really understanding what it was I was playing. I think the rule set for that was AD&D, if I remember correctly.
I don't know, but I tell you, I think you are... how old are you, Jason?
I'm 39 in just over a month.
Yeah, so we're the same age, basically. I remember buying Baldur's Gate 2, and I actually took it back because I had no fucking clue what was going on. I was like, there was far too much to read here. I'd never heard of D&D. But when do you think Baldur's Gate 2 was released originally?
Oh, I'm going to go... Well, Half-Life was 96, wasn't it? So I reckon 97?
Shadows of Amn, was that the subtitle of that game?
Yeah, that was the one. Yeah.
September 2000.
2000? Jesus Christ, what is time anymore?
I know, and here we are in
mad.
2023, but 1 month to the day, I believe, or 2 weeks to the day of Baldur's Gate 3 coming out.
Yeah, that's an exciting one. I'm looking forward to that. I've tried the spiritual sequels to Baldur's Gate. I've tried the Divinities. I've tried those, and I've enjoyed them, but I've never felt like they've grabbed me to the point where I needed to see the end of them. And I'm sort of hoping. I'm hoping that. That Baldur's Gate 3 might be enough to see me through that.
Maybe. It certainly looks good. And so that was your starting point of RPGs, and then any kind of dice-based experience since then?
I would say this with Pathfinder 2e has been my first regular experience. I'd had the odd game here and there. I think probably the very first one was basically, it was a long-running community game. I think it had been running for, I want to say something like 9 years.
Wow.
Like a game called Dungeon World, which is based on the Powered by the Apocalypse system, and that was with quite a large gaming community. All
done over forums, or was that like an actual?
It was done over Discord. It was done remotely. Sorry, did you pick up that dog bark in the background there?
I did. I thought you were putting sound effects in already, so I appreciated it.
Yeah, sorry, hang on. I will just go and yell at the dog. He's never barked during a Pathfinder game, has he? Never ever heard. The one that we're recording is like, I decide the world needs to hear me now. What was the question? We'll start from scratch with that one.
So Baldur's Gate 2 was your introductions to maybe slightly more hardcore RPGs. What have you played since then?
He's just fucking walked in the room. Get out!
Oh, I'm keeping this in. Keeping it all in. I've been playing Pathfinder 2e online with Jason for 3 years, and never once has the dog barked or walked into the room tonight. You know that BBC interview where the kid comes running in and the nanny? Yes. I half expect to see your girlfriend run in and just try to talk about it.
Just try and usher him out, yeah.
Okay, so have you got any... So other than Pathfinder 2e, which I think was the first time playing it was with us, had you Dungeons and Dragons experience?
I don't think I'd ever played D&D before. I've started a game and unfortunately it's sort of drifted away a little bit, but I started a game since playing Pathfinder 2, but I don't think I ever actually played it prior to 2e. So 2e is the first sort of quote unquote live TTRPG I've played.
Great. Okay. Well, I think a lot of our listeners, hopefully, when they eventually listen, will all be 2e fans. We had Kimon on for the last session, who was a long-term Pathfinder 1e player, and noting the differences. And actually, I was listening to another podcast today, the guys over at GCP, where Joe finally admitted that he does believe that 2e is the better game now. He's finally come around.
Yeah, 2e it's a really, really interesting one. Is to peek behind the curtain is our games. Is I will frequently bemoan to you that as much as I love it, and I do genuinely, I think it is the best of the fantasy RPG systems out there right now. I think there are others I enjoy more, but they are more distinct, sort of niche.
Right. So more
niche systems,
D20 based.
D&D. Yeah, so of your standard D20s, as I think Pathfinder 2e is by far the best. That's not to say that I wouldn't say every session. I'd say maybe once every 3 or 4 sessions go on a rant about some aspect of the game which I feel is just mad or bullshit.
Yes, the phrase Pathfinder bullshit has come up several times. We talked about the letter deaths last session.
Yes, yeah, those are. I think it is a wonderful game, and I do think it will continue to improve. It is it is very, very important to consider that this is only the second edition of it. Not counting 4e, which I think was what Pathfinder 1e built.
I think that's right. Yeah,
but he's not counting that. This is only the second edition of the game, and they have. Bearing in mind the strides they've made with moving to the 3 action system, which I think is brilliant. Is rather than having to juggle I've got 74 bonus actions this turn in 5e.
Yeah, and then you've got to add your con plus half your strength plus half your modifier.
Yeah, I think it's really, really, it's really, really good. It's really, really good. It's really, really solid, but it has got its flaws. I do think there has been, I think it's getting better, but I think in some adventure paths there has been a real over-reliance on here is one enemy, and basically because it's one enemy with 3 actions fighting 4, 5 players with 3 actions, the enemy becomes very, very very ridiculously powerful, and B, they have to give it massive to hit bonuses to make it viable. So it's you are effectively on one side of the equation taking dice rolls out of it altogether, which is frustrating for the players. At the end of the day, it is a game that is played by players to enjoy it, and I think sometimes especially when the players are rolling badly, it's punishing for that. Absolutely, you feel as a player is right. Well, I need to roll let's say a 16 or better just to hit this thing because it's got a high AC.
Seems fair.
So
if it's 3 levels higher than you in a severe encounter, which if it's 4 against 1, it's usually 3 levels higher for that.
So you are looking at, let's say, okay, so I as a player have a 25% chance to hit this thing before we take into account pluses and minuses and things like that. against a creature that has, hey, this creature has got is because of its to hit, it might only need to roll a natural 4 or a natural 5 to hit you.
Yes, exactly, which means a 14 or 15 to crit. It's certainly on the first hit, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, so again, and bearing in mind, again, is depending on the class you are playing, etc., etc., as someone who's played his fair share of squishy characters, and God love them, our group, we do love leaving a wizard standing on their own. We really do.
Yes, yes. So you have played, Jason has played a monk for our Extinction Curse campaign. He has played a cleric of Sarenrae for our Abomination Vaults campaign. Mm-hmm. And we are on chapter 3 of Night of the Grey Death, where you are now up to a level 18 wizard.
Yes, that's
How are you finding that? Unlimited spells.
Certainly a lot of spells is tracking as well, because I went for the I think it's the Universalist school, which basically means you can drain your bonded item once per level, and there's no natural way I think of doing that in Foundry at the moment, which means that I am having to keep track of that across multiple sessions, because what do you reckon? The last session we've just run, we probably got through about 4 or 5 sessions worth of combats since we last had a long rest.
Chapter 2 was very much, without giving too much away, takes place over a very defined period of time, in-game hours, but without any opportunity for long rests, with several combats and a couple of very juicy combats, all leading up to, no rest. But I personally, as the GM, enjoy it, not just because you see the resources running down, but it is rarer, I think, in 2E for a sorcerer, wizard, spellcaster to run out of spells in a day. That's not something we've really encountered before, I would suggest.
Definitely. Well, I would say certainly at reasonable levels is one of... And to be fair, this is not a Pathfinder criticism. I've yet to find a TTRPG that doesn't make playing a low-level spellcaster one of the most miserable experiences in game. It's if you are playing a level 1 through 3 spellcaster I'll use Pathfinder as the example. Basically, most combats for you are right. Well, I'm going to go stand over here and try not to die.
Yeah,
and then twice per day I can cast magic weapon on the fighter. That's my game for the first 5 or 6 sessions while we bed in, and it's not a Pathfinder specific thing. It's a TTRPG thing. Wizards,
it's balance ultimately, isn't it? And I guess there'd be people screaming at well, what about if you put points in here and points in here? Yeah, that's fine, but I think everyone would agree that the chance of death is actually far higher at level 1 to 2 than it has been at levels 16 to 18 that we've been playing.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. And for good reason. Is ultimately if you're holding the gun to my head and saying you've got to lose a character, I'd rather lose a character I've only played for 2-3 sessions than one I've been building for 8-9 months or whatever. So that's and ultimately as well, if I'm playing a character that long, I've got a much better handle on what they can and can't do. What level of hits are going to be like, oh, okay, I can't take too many more of those, I need to get away. Whereas, again, at low levels, you have bad luck with a crit against the wrong enemy and you can be one-shot.
Yeah, exactly. So just before we move into the Stolen Fate stuff, I forgot to mention we obviously ran through the entirety of Fall of Plaguestone as well. Which has been your favourite? What has been your favourite? I
think Night of the Grey Death has been the one I've enjoyed the most. I think as much as high levels are good, big numbers, but I do think as well is in terms thematically, it's been really, really interesting, and just high level combat, especially playing a wizard, gives you so many options. You can do so much more at high level than you can at a much, much lower level. So he's looking at as we joked earlier, level 1, level 3 spellcaster. Well, I've got 2 spell slots to last me all day. Whereas, I could go in, I could go into a combat as my level 18 wizard and go, right, well, here's 3 level 9 spells off the bat. And it gives you the option to
plus
more dramatically turn the tide of a fight. To use the example, we had one combat against a particularly unpleasant enemy where I was able to land I think you critically failed with the slow.
Just a fail. I critically passed the first time and then failed. I critically failed. I think it was just a fail, but yeah.
And he's just robbing you of that one action as a wizard. Being able to do that is just such a it's a fight-changing thing. It's only being able to cast a spell or move as an enemy. That takes away a huge number of options from you. And I think having that, having the ability to, I can do that, or I can cast, haste at level 7, which is going to give every one of my team an extra action. It's all of those options, and being able to do that. It's fantastic. I think being able to do that is so much fun. You need a lot more knowledge of it, as I wouldn't have been able to do that a month into playing for the first time. I think things would have gone very, very badly.
Yeah.
But in terms of enjoyment, I think Night of the Grey Death has definitely been the one I've had the most fun with.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I have too. We've had some incredible story beats in our previous campaigns, and I really look forward to some more incredible story beats. And I think it's twofold. One is that you as players and me as GM are far more comfortable with the rules and systems, so we're not spending time looking those up. You're also far more comfortable with just the general feel of the game, so the ability to run a level 18 character is far easier, as you've just said. And I think the other part is Foundry has a lot to play a part of that, because we're all far more familiar with that as a system, and it takes so much pressure off, especially me as a GM, but to be able to automate some of these feats, which are really quite complicated. We've joked about it, but at level 18, there are serious numbers of dice being rolled quite often. Yeah. So if you were doing that face to face, I'm sure it's fun to get 20 d6 in your hand. I'm sure that's really fun to roll it, but to then do that, count them up, add your modifiers, etc., and Foundry just does it all at the click of a button. There is something to be said for that. There absolutely is, and just as well as it's little things as well. Like is suddenly, hang on, why have I got a +3 to that? Of course, because it's this feat. Because of you might not remember.
Yeah, absolutely. Is we had a good laugh at Chris the other week, who'd been playing a level 18 cleric, and I think had forgotten 3 different feats.
Well, I'm not sure forgotten's the right word, but he certainly was less aware of them than the others. So it was nice to remind him. We love you, Chris. We love you.
We do love you, Chris. I jest because I love.
And Malachi seems like a cool character, so
I'm looking forward to that. And we've got some very, very cool character concepts going on here.
We have. Well, we've had 3, Jason. Now is the time to unveil the 4th. So much like Camone's, I do know a little bit, but what I do not know is your character's name. So let's get into it. This is Jason's Stolen Fate level 11 character.
Yeah, I will be playing for the duration of this campaign, hopefully.
No, you won't.
Lupin Malus.
Lupin Malus. Is that Mallus?
Just the 1L.
Just the 1L. Lupin Malus. Okay, that's a cool name. I like it. Lupin. Has that got werewolf connotations, or is that something else?
Lupine, I think, does mean wolven. Okay. So yeah, it is. I imagine. I think it's because he is. I think when I was originally, the first draft of Lupin was from Taldor, and I believe a lot of their names are Roman. So I sort of went for something with that IN, that sort of slightly Latin feel to it.
Okay, Lupin Malus. And what ancestry have we got for Lupin?
So Lupin is and has definitely always been a half-elf.
Always has been? I'll take
always has been. Yeah. A small peek behind the curtain here is when we realised, or when we first decided we were going to be playing Stolen Fate, is that the players, we went away into our own little side group and worked out between us what we were all going to play. And at no point did any of us have a discussion around ancestries, because it wasn't something that we particularly. Yeah, it wasn't really. We don't actually. I'm not sure if I'm giving away trade secrets here, but we don't. We just used it to coordinate what the party makeup in terms of classes was going to be. We've not really done much talking to each other about the backgrounds, or even, and this is probably a strategic mistake, but even sort of what skills and things like that we're going to be digging into. So it has been...
that, though. I think story-wise that fits. You guys, I think we've all agreed that you don't know each other at the start of this campaign. So yeah, and I disapprove of sharing tactics anyway. So, okay, so we've got Lupin Malus. He is half-elf now.
Yes, because basically what we hadn't done is discussed ancestries, and we ended up through pure fluke. I think certainly 3 of the 4 had ended up going human. And that wasn't through any particular decision. I think of the 4 in Night of the Grey Death, I think only 1 is human. That's Matty's character, isn't it? The Baron?
Yeah, only 1 is human, yeah.
And that was the first human character he'd played. So it really was just pure chance, I think, that we'd all ended up there. So and it was only when listening to, I think I listened to both Maddie and Chris's ones, and I was like, oh God, 2 of us are human already, and I'm going to be the 3rd. So I messaged you frantically last night and said, just FYI, Lupin's going to be a half-elf now. Just to mix things up and to, bring a little bit of it. There's,
So here's a question to throw you on the spot, Jason. Mm-hmm. What difference do you see in the way you might, not mechanically, but role-playing the differences between the 2? Where do you see those differences lie?
I got a little bit lucky here, in as far as I'd already, when planning Lupin and sort of working out what I wanted him to be, is I did want him to be somewhat... aloof is probably the wrong word, but sometimes he'll come across as arrogant, and a little bit detached. He's generally quite a sort of good-humoured and friendly guy, but he's because of his background, and we'll cover this in a bit, but he's of noble blood. He can come across as sort of slightly aloof. So he's thankfully I'd already kind of got him in mind with that, and that ties in quite nicely with how half-elves seem to be seen across Galarian. So that was quite fortunate.
Half-elves taking some of that aloofness over, say, their more pure human counterparts. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so what sort of age are we looking at for Lupin?
So, Lupin's, I would say, probably in his late 40s. I think he's going to be fairly comfortably the oldest in this particular group. He's very much babysitting, I think, here. He's well-travelled. He is again, probably jumping ahead slightly here, but he is a merchant. So he's been doing a lot of travelling. So he's well-travelled, and he looks a bit like it as well. I would imagine if you were to ask a sample of people what age he was, he'd probably get a result he probably wouldn't like.
Oh, that's most of us now, Jason, as we head towards...
Oh, it very much is.
Yeah. Okay, so he's a merchant. I think that's cool. I think quite often adventurers and heroes, that tends to be their job. You kind of don't always get that they've got a profession. We've obviously got Malachi, who is a bard, but this guy is a merchant.
He's a merchant of magical items. So he, this is how, in my head, he's sort of come across the team, and it ties into something else, which I'm sure we'll cover in a second. But he travels, he buys magical items, he sells magical items. It's also his interest. He's very, very into them. He likes to spend time, understanding them, what makes them tick, experimenting with them. If he had his way, he'd probably just be a collector of magic items, but unfortunately he's not wealthy enough to do that, so he has to sort of buy and sell and trade up and down, to get his hands on items he wants.
So an inquisitive nature?
Yes. I think that's probably fair.
Is that tied with usually merchants are quite money-led? Is there an element of that, or is there a genuine interest in these items that he's buying and selling?
Oh, he's definitely very, very interested in them. Very, very interested in them. He's pragmatic with it. He understands that if he wants more magical items, he's going to have to find a way of paying for them, and that means selling the ones he has, buying new ones at a healthy discount, and selling them at a healthy markup. So it's he's not silly with it. If he had his way, if money was no object, yeah, sure, he'd just be collecting these things and, putting them in a vault somewhere. But no, that the reality of it is that, he knows he needs to do that.
Very cool. So a question for you then. He's obviously starting at level 11, which is a quite renowned character, whether or not the general populace would know that. Is that level 11, would you say, if you were dishing out RPG points as he's built in a more traditional Skyrim or whatever, is some of that because he's put all his points into the trading side of things? Or, as we know, there's going to be combat. How is that kind of manifested in his journey to where he is when we join him?
I think when you consider, Galarian is a dangerous environment, you don't you don't
when we
last
play,
long.
It's really dangerous.
Yeah, really, really dangerous. Hey, actually, speaking of, you've never killed one of my characters yet.
Have I not?
You've not. I'm the only one you haven't killed yet.
Note
apart from Kimone, who's only just started.
Yes.
Yeah, but is in Extinction Curse. Brother Davhorn is now the only one of the original four standing.
Yes, and we won't talk about him, but he has got a whole other story which will come up at some point. Okay, so how has he got to level 11? Is this week? I kind of thinking it. So I remember a story when Craigslist started. There was this guy who started with a pencil and he traded it for a pad of paper, and he traded that for a book, and traded that for a car to a house to a. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Is that kind of his journey, or is it slightly more?
Yeah, kind of. So, to dig into his background a little bit, is I did mention earlier, Lupin is of noble blood, but he basically not in no particularly dramatic sense, but he left home when he was young, about 16 years old, decided that he just didn't want to sit in nobility. It just wasn't for him. He wasn't enjoying it. He wanted to go and find his own path, forge his own path. So he has come from money, but his collection, is one he has built himself. He has very much traded up. He started out as a traveling horse salesman apprentice. He just made his way to a local trader. Are you looking for an apprentice? Yes, I am. Learned the ropes from this man, and then essentially found himself. He was getting a little bit too good, because he found himself in Absalom one day, woke up and the salesman had left him overnight. From that point onwards, he sort of built his own. Empire is very much a strong word, but certainly built up his own business from that moment.
And we've not talked about class, so that's probably a nice segue. What class? And I think this is probably, for me, the most interesting class, just because we've not had a fighter we've not had, but what class is Lupin Malus?
Lupin is a thaumaturge.
A thaumaturge?
Yes. Or
a thaumaturge, or a thaumaturge. Have we agreed that it's thaumaturge? Have you?
I will be calling him a thaumaturge. If you wish to disagree with me, please feel free to email in, and I will move all of those to an outbox that I won't read.
So a thaumaturge, amazing. We've never had one of these. I was frantically reading through the Dark Archive, which I think is where the thaumaturge first appears.
Yep.
Do you want to just give us a kind of brief overview of what that means?
So
we don't need to read word for word, but just a quick overview of what a thaumaturge does that maybe another class wouldn't.
So a thaumaturge is a what's the best way? It's a martial character. Generally, it's not a spellcaster by design. Although it does have access to it, which is something we will cover as we go through the levels, I'm sure. But it's a martial character that relies on basically two main things. It's firstly esoterica. Now, again, without wanting to go too deep into it, esoterica is a thaumaturge's way of weaponizing weaknesses. So as a thaumaturge, you can use your big collection of items that you have, and these aren't items in the way of like mechanical items in games like potions and things like that. These are very much sort of nod, wink, wink. You're carrying pouches of all this stuff, kind of similar to how a wizard has
spell components.
Spell components, thank you.
Or an alchemist might have crafting bits and pieces, maybe, or an inventor.
These aren't sort of big tangible things that I need to, buy in. I have access to these things through my background, as it were.
Okay.
So, but these are items that Lupin can use in the in the heat of combat to identify and exploit vulnerabilities, and that is the name of one of the Thaumaturge's key abilities, the exploit vulnerability.
Okay, cool. And I believe that they use something not too dissimilar from a cleric in a cleric would have their holy symbol when they have to do their abilities, or a bard has to have their instrument. Is there something similar for the Thaumaturge?
Yes. So the other big the other big tool in the Thaumaturge's toolkit is their implements. Implement, yes.
Okay.
So it's Thaumaturge initially gets access to one, although I believe by the time we'll come into contact with Lupus, he'll have at least two. Mm-hmm. These are items that essentially offer the Thaumaturge some specific powers. So you may have, for example, a amulet that lets you use it as a reaction to offer an ally some resistance to the target of your vulnerability. Kind of similar to how the ranger has hunt prey.
Right.
You can mark a target as your prey. Is the Thaumaturge can exploit the vulnerability of an opponent.
Okay.
And what you can then do is, once that opponent is marked, if that opponent wants to attack, let's say Malachi, is I could then use my reaction with the amulet to say, Malachi, you get resistance, whatever, to this attack. There are other implements that do other things. Some of them are offensive. There are some very cool toys in play, which we will cover as we go through the levels. But yeah, Thaumaturge is very, very interesting. It's one that looks terrifying when you first start reading through it, which I'm sure you probably found as well last night. But actually, once you break it down and get through that first sort of paragraph or two of text, it's like, oh no, actually, mechanically, this isn't too bad. Yeah, no,
I've had a look at it. I think the biggest issue for us will be the automation of that. I've kind of had a look at Foundry. It's not perfect for Thaumaturge. I know that people are working on it and looking at it. So there might be a slight more manual amount of work for you to do, just keeping track of things. But
yeah,
we've been playing this 3 years now. If anyone's capable, it's you. So Thaumaturge, very cool. Late 40s merchant Thaumaturge. What I want to just kind of ask you about now is where is Lupin in their life at the moment? They're going to receive this card from the Harrow deck. Is harrowing something he's come across? Is Harrow decks maybe something he's traded? Sort of where is he at the moment? What sort of path is he on?
Lupin, and this is a theme, and this is a somewhat personal thing as well, is that I myself am very much a polar opposite to I'll use Matty as the example here. Matty loves his lore and his backstories, and it's fantastic. I love seeing the stuff Matty comes up with. Me personally, I could take it or leave it. His lore and background stuff doesn't do it for me in terms of building a character.
Sure. And
I wanted to, as they always say when creating a character, put a little bit of yourself into that. Lupin is very much he's a living in the moment guy. He doesn't have a big plan. He doesn't have the master plan, and some of that is that ties in very well with his career. He's a merchant. He goes where the money is. If he finds himself in possession of an item that is incredibly valuable in let's say the Moangi Expanse, then that's where he's going.
Okay.
That's where he's going next. There's no point planning too far ahead because who knows what tomorrow brings.
So he's quite well travelled.
Very much so.
Okay. And I'm guessing then some of the combat stuff will maybe have come from him having to travel all of these lands, and jump in if you're wrong, but he's obviously going to be adept at combat. Is that tied to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Galarian, very dangerous place. You don't last long if you can't defend yourself to some degree. He's smart enough. The reason he will presumably be with this party is because you travel with adventurers because they can handle themselves. A group of 4 is a much less appealing target to bandits than one 40-year-old guy on his own.
Sure. So when this card comes into his possession, do you want to tell us what card you are going with?
No, because I can't remember.
Okay, we will leave
basically, I was, again, because Lupin's role, basically, I have a very valid reason for him to be in possession of any of them. And I think when I was looking at the build, is none of the cards felt like a really, really strong fit for him. So as I essentially said to the others is, look, you guys pick what works for you. I will take the one that's left. Because actually there is I've got a very, very easy mechanical reason for Lupin to have this card, and I can have any of them. Whereas I know certainly, I think definitely Matty had one that was like, no, this is a really good fit for you. It makes no sense for anyone but you to have this. Yeah,
and Kimone 2 with the rabbit prints, which tied to his ability modifiers. Something just for our listeners, the Thaumaturge is the implements that we'll get into. Some of them, which we only realised recently, are tied to certain decks of the Harrow. I think usually in a normal non-Harrow themed adventure, there'd be more flavour. But as Harrow becomes more part of Pathfinder 2e and the world, and certainly this adventure path, there's going to be some natural, easy story beats there for as you go and collect these cards in whatever manner. There's definitely some easy story beats there. So I think having one character who's just like, well, this is the one that appeared with me and I don't know why yet, that's as interesting sometimes as, well, this is why this card came to me. And having a character who maybe doesn't, again, tell me if I'm wrong, but a character who maybe doesn't lean so much into destiny and fate and the belief of that, then he's probably less bothered, but maybe intrigued.
I think that's definitely, those are the stories that I, as Jason, find interesting. Are the ones where this character isn't the designated hero. This is just someone who happened to find himself in this scenario and is kind of winging it. You know, is the film, when you look at action films and games, the ones that I enjoy are games like, my favourite game of all time is Uncharted 2. Okay. It's absolutely love the game. I just love the way that you never feel like any of this is planned. It's always like Nathan Drake he's winging it by the seat of his pants. He's reacting to everything that happens, and it's that dynamic feel, and it's because you never know what's going to happen next, and whatever that thing is, you never know how he's going to handle it. I think those are the interesting, exciting stories for me.
So in some ways, this is his story, potentially.
Yeah, exactly. Is this, his story hasn't happened yet. This is the start of his story, and whereas with Kimone's character and with Maddie's character, maybe not quite so much with Chris's, but it is where their story is already in motion. That stuff has happened before the camera pans to us at the very first scene. Stuff has happened, whereas that isn't really the case with Lupin. He's just kind of there.
Can we ask then, has Lupin, he's late 40s, is he married or has he been married?
No, I don't think so. Is mainly because, again, being a travelling merchant, it's not great for putting down roots. You can't really afford to settle somewhere like that. It's especially, as if you were going to, I always feel if you were going to be, trying to settle down roots in the kind of city large enough to, really make being a magic item trader profitable. So you're looking at your Absaloms, etc. You're going to be a brave man to do that because there's going to be plenty of competition there, and they're not going to be welcoming to that competition. So I think having that wandering nature, fits the character very, very well, but it just doesn't. It's certainly not conducive to a healthy family or social life.
No, and I think what's going to be interesting is that although all the characters have come from different places with different stories and different motivations, there is a purely through chance or fate a group of 4 characters who, in their own way, are all wanderers. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing to come out, because if you were to apply it to the real world in some ways, being a true wanderer for a lot of years, that is quite a tough road to be on. And there will be probably interesting stories, certainly from a character who's a bit older like yours, which we don't need to talk about now, but he has got a story, even if it's not the reason for this story. He's been around a long time. He's seen a lot. He's traveled to a lot of places. But to be a true wanderer is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I think with Lupin, it's probably more sort of almost anecdotes than stories. I think is that he's always going to be able to call back to. You remember that time in can't think of a place name that isn't Absalom. I keep going back to Absalom.
Taldor.
I remember that time in Taldor. Yeah, the thing with the Azketi with the mustache.
So is this a sneak peek of the voice, Jason, or is that working?
Well, I've only got 2 voices anyway, so it's
German and Matt Berry.
Yeah.
And we've got a German, so you can't do that one anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm fairly sure that would get me beaten up by Kimon.
All right, so let us dig into the build information now, the nitty-gritty, if you like. If we can maybe focus on the feats, anything that's interesting, and then I'd imagine that with the Thaumaturge, it's going to be a couple of areas where we spend a little bit more time just discussing what. So, as I've done with the other players, we now, just a quick recap, we've got a late 40s half-elf Thaumaturge, who is a wanderer, and let's start with the background.
Yeah, so Lupin's background is a magical merchant, as we touched on. So it's it's a very nice, very neat fit. Is to pull a little bit of the flavour from the text directly. Is selling magic items isn't like being an ordinary merchant. The wares you buy and sell are expensive, making each sale rare and lucrative. You've developed knowledge of expert handiwork to ensure you don't fall for a scam, since buying a single counterfeit item can lead to bankruptcy. So it's it felt a very, obviously, is bearing in mind Lupin's background and where it came from. Is actually, I saw the background and kind of decided I really like that. I think it fits the Thaumaturge really, really well. There's, a really, really cool reason for him to have these implements. And right, where of the, this amulet that lets you, reduce people's damage. Where would someone have that, other than, being a magical trader of items? So I think, I saw that and thought, right, I can build something around this.
And with that, you get boosts to your abilities, but rather than dig into that specifically, as a Thaumaturge, what is your key ability modifier?
So my key ability modifier as a Thaumaturge is Charisma.
Charisma?
Yeah,
is
interestingly enough. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, though, because
3 of the party
are... three of us are charismatic, but so it's just to go into the sort of slightly mechanical chat behind what building a Thaumaturge from a player's point of view is they are very, very what's known as mad. Now, mad is short for multi-ability dependent. So Thaumaturge is ostensibly a melee class, and that is the role Lupin will broadly be playing within the group, because I'm very conscious that we have a bard and a sorcerer, and having played the lone martial character in a team full of squishies, I know it's not very much fun. So I was very keen to make sure that Lupin can handle himself in close combat. So that means my key ability score is Charisma, but I've also got to have some Constitution, because I can't afford to be too squishy if I'm playing in front lines. I've got to have Dexterity for reasonable armor and or being able to hit something. I've got to have a bit of wisdom, or my will saves are going to be crap. And I need a little bit of strength if I'm going to be in combat.
Yep.
So he's suddenly, of the 6 ability scores, well, I've got to have something in 5 of them. So it's a very, very interesting... I've not built something like this before. It's probably the closest would have been the character I play in Extinction Curse, Brother Davhorn, who's a monk, and as we touched on, is the lone. He's basically the only really out and out martial character in that group. Yeah.
So how, without maybe too much detail, but how, if a character is a martial character, how is Charisma gonna aid that class? Or are you suggesting that it's important, but it's maybe not as important to, say, a wizard who needs... is wizard the right one? Or sorcerer?
Sorcerer is Charisma.
Charisma, yeah. So how does that affect him?
Is the key ability score is Charisma, and that feeds directly into your Thaumaturge class DC.
Okay, so rather than a spellcasting DC, it's a class DC.
Yeah, and that will become apparent in a sort of as we go down the build and how and where that references. But yeah, there are a few key and very cool abilities that rely on your Thaumaturge DC. So I have very much gone with that as there's the top stat, as it were.
Okay. Right, so Magical Merchant, that's going to give you the Crafter's Appraisal skill feat. Mm-hmm. Want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so that is a very, very useful tool, is because we don't really have anyone who's particularly intelligence.
No one.
I don't believe.
No one.
And I feel like having someone who can do just the very, very sort of minimum level of crafting is going to be quite useful within the team.
Okay.
In terms of what this particular skill does, my knowledge of items construction skills allows me to discern their magical effects as well. So I can use crafting instead of a skill associated with a magic tradition, i.e. occultism, arcana, etc., to identify an item. Identify a magic item, should I say.
Very cool. Okay, yeah. So that makes sense. All right.
Yep.
All right, level 1 Thaumaturge then. Take us through it. What are your choices?
Obviously, the initial heritage was half elf.
Mm-hmm.
So that very nicely gives me access to all human ancestry feats. It gives me access to all the elf ancestry feats, and then also a few nice little sort of half elf ones as well. What I've gone with on this one, I went with Natural Ambition from the human skill feat. One, it's a very useful feat mechanically because it gives you an extra class feat at level 1, but also it actually ties quite nicely with Lupin as well. He is a naturally ambitious character. He's he deliberately gone out there into the world when he didn't need to. He didn't have to go out and trade items on the streets of Absalom. He could have just been sitting in Taldor, drinking wine. Yeah. So it sort of tied in very nicely. The class feat I took with that was ammunition thaumaturgy. So basically what that allows me to do is when I'm using a ranged weapon, so what I should probably clarify here, so that to use a thaumaturge's implements, so his amulet or his mirror or his chalice or whatever he's using, he's got to have it in his hand.
Right. So, and this is not your weapon.
No, this isn't your weapon.
Damage. This is no. As I say, is it similar to a cleric needing to hold their holy?
Yes.
Whatever.
Essentially, is if you imagine that's probably the best sort
right.
of
okay
easy comparison.
And your first implement is
the amulet.
The amulet.
So I've taken the amulet, and obviously we'll cover that in a second.
And there's a choice, sorry, Jason, but there's a choice of different amulets, a bit like a sorcerer has a choice of bloodlines, a bit like a ranger has a choice of different ranger types. This is kind of your chance of choosing what line you want to go down with the thaumaturge. Is that right?
Yes and no. Because you will at various points during the thaumaturge leveling up process, is you will get access to a second and eventually, I believe, a third implement.
As you level up.
I think by the time we hit level 11, Lupin will have access to 2. But initially I've taken the amulet. So what this, and obviously you need to have the relevant implement in your hand to be able to utilize whatever power it has. So this ammunition thaumaturgy basically allows me to hold a weapon, a implement, and esoterica. So in other words, or esoterica. So whether that's whatever item I'm using to exploit a vulnerability, or my implement and my weapon, and also to reload at the same time. So basically, I don't need to drop something to be able to reload a bow or a gun or whatever.
So maybe as we get more into this, what I'm hearing is that thaumaturge in a combat situation certainly is juggling or needing to be aware of their implement, their weapon, and the esoterica as these bits of stuff that he's got on them. And this feat is allowing you to do stuff without having to spend actions to drop things or reload or... Yeah,
so it's essentially, it does, mechanically it's going to allow me to reload a weapon without having to worry too much about juggling what is in my other hand. I can effectively load a new round into something without having to go, I'm going to drop my amulet and then I'm going to pick it up and no. don't have to worry about any of that. So that felt like a very, very good way of spending a level 1 feat.
Cool. We will maybe get into then the reload, because so far you've said you're going to be a hand-to-hand, but if there's reloading, we'll come on to that, because I'm sure that'll be relevant later on.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The main level 1 class feat I've taken is a incredibly powerful feat.
I hate it already.
I have no idea why this is at level 1. So I'm looking forward to the discussion about why you're banning this. But it is scroll thaumaturgy.
All right.
So my multidisciplinary study of magic means I know how to activate the magic in scrolls with ease. You can activate scrolls of any magical tradition using your thaumaturge class DC for the scroll's DC, rather than a particular spell DC. So effectively, that means I can, as long as I can get my hands on a scroll for it, I can cast any spell off any spell list, and I can upgrade the DC to my thaumaturge class DC.
Or downgrade the DC is probably the case.
Or downgrade, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, basically...
If you found a level 10 spell scroll, you can cast it using your class DC rather than whatever the flat DC would be for that scrolls.
Yes, so it's probably less useful for high level stuff than it is low level stuff, because I imagine if you know, it's one of the challenges you have with low level items is that they're great up to a point at which point, let's say, is a DC 15 escape check for something is great at level 1 and 2, but actually as soon as you're up around level 4, that DC 15 is useless.
Oh, now I understand. So if you found a low-level spell where items don't generally level up the DC, they're fixed, what you're saying is if you found a low-level spell, you actually can... The DC, say, for the save becomes your class DC.
You're effectively upcasting using a scroll. It's incredibly powerful. I can't believe they put all of that into 1 feat, much less a level 1 feat.
Are you sure it's just the activation of the scroll rather than the actual scroll effect?
Yep. No,
okay.
It is. Yeah, it's a really, really powerful. Really, I can't see I'm going to be using it too often for things like offensive spells, like attack spells, because we've got a sorcerer and we've got a bard. So it is. I can't think I'm going to be using it too much, but for the occasion when, and again, this comes from maybe playing a high level wizard. There are certain scenarios when having access to this specific spell,
yes,
I might only need it once or twice in a campaign, but oh my god, when that 1 or 2 comes up, it's a lifesaver. So is being able to do that and do it across any spell list, that just seems so versatile and so useful for the party.
Very cool. And ties into this thaumaturgist thing of being able to manipulate stuff that's not necessarily native to them or weaknesses in order to get an advantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Nice.
So moving on to the implement. So my first implement will be the amulet, as we touched on. So the amulet basically offers... it's a protective item. So is the reason I've gone for this one is I'm conscious that we are, with the exception of Kimon, we are probably quite squishy as a team.
Yep.
I'm a little bit, and we don't have direct access to I know the bard has some very good healing spells, but they're not a cleric.
No.
If things do get slightly lumpy in a combat, I think we need ways of just making sure we don't take too much damage. So the amulet offers me, at its basic level, allows me to mitigate damage from the target of my exploit vulnerability. So as we touched on, that kind of works like hunt prey. I identify the creature or whatever the enemy I'm fighting is, use exploit vulnerability on it,
which is basically like a recall knowledge check.
Yeah, essentially exploit vulnerability. It's a slightly fancy recall knowledge check, which I'm sure we will probably cover the first time we do it live. It will make more sense to do it then. But I can use this on either myself or a target ally within 15 feet, and I gain resistance to all damage against that triggering damage equal to 2 plus my level.
Cool.
So, and that's just a reaction. I can just use that once around. So is if someone's about to get crit or something like that, right? Here you go. At a minimum, that's resistance 13 to that damage.
Yeah, we'll dig into the actual because that esoteric lore check, whatever it's called, is quite an important part of the thaumaturge. But that's definitely one to play out during an encounter rather than now. It will make much more sense, be far easier to understand, I reckon.
Yeah, for sure.
But I will say I'm glad I read the book this week because I do know what you're talking about, even if no one else does. All right. So Amulet is your first implement.
Yes, and then I also get, just worth mentioning, even though I know we've covered it, I think I forget whose, but I think in someone else's character, is I get the feat Dubious Knowledge.
Yes.
So that's a free feat as part of my background as well. So obviously when I do a recall knowledge check, I'll get 2 bits of information, and one of them's true, one of them's false.
That was Matty's character who said it's always the first bit that's true. So I have made a note.
Now you've done that, so now it will always be the second bit. Yeah,
and it's going to be twice per combat. So yeah, it's going to be fun.
So yeah, moving on to level 2. One
point, you do get low light vision.
Yes, half elf background. So yeah, I do have low light vision. I don't have access to full dark vision, and maybe I'll get a couple of scrolls
with a nice DC. Okay, second level of this thaumaturge.
The second level class feat I've taken is Talisman Esoterica.
Thaumaturge feat.
Yes, so that basically allows me to, during my daily preparations, I can make 2 talismans with an item level no higher than half my level. So I can effectively, because it rounds up, I believe, so I can create talismans up to level 6. Talismans they're a weird thing, because when you look at them in the book, you go, wow, these are really, really cool. These are great. And then you look at the price and realise you can use them exactly once and go, well, there's no way I'm spending money on that.
Sure.
Or
and their one-time use is important usually, right?
Yeah,
I think they all are, yeah.
Or you end up with the Final Fantasy Megalixir problem, where you've got a wonderful collection of really great talismans that you're too frightened to use because what if I need it more later on? Yeah. So you end up finishing the game with 400 amazing talismans that you never used.
Yep.
So yeah, each day during my daily prep, I can create 2 talismans. There's temporary items. They lose their magic next day, but that will basically encourage me to make them, to hand them out to people, and for those people to make use of them. So some talismans are pretty good. Some of them are a bit meh, but
for that odd time when it's like the one that protects you from a crit or gives you a boost to your fort save, and you're going to fight something that's going to attack that, then absolutely, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, very, very, very useful. Very, very useful one. I'm just going to have to, stick a post-it note on the monitor saying create and hand out talismans because it is a very, very easy one to forget in the daily prep.
And that's actually something that Nethys does quite well now, is if you go to Talisman, it'll actually list all the equipment with the Talisman trait, I think it is.
Yes, that's one of the few things I do like about Nethys when compared to Easy Tools is that it does have that ability to display everything in a spreadsheet format that you can then filter and play with as you need.
I went on Nethys this week and it has improved substantially from when I even last used it. So you can make it look a bit nicer. There's pop-ups and the search is really cool. So although I do still very much rate PF2 Easy, there are some definite benefits here which I really like. So the Talismans thing is cool.
Nethys is fantastic, but with all the love in the world, to the guys who say it looks like a 1998 Angel Firesite. It's only missing some automatically streaming MIDI.
But honestly, go and have a little look. Like now, the themes and the feel, you can really customize it. It might not be perfect, but absolutely having 2 different resources. I really like that feat, Jason. I think I mentioned it in one of the other ones where a character can, at the start of their daily prep, give stuff out to the PCs that may or may not be relevant, but if they are relevant, really great story beats.
Yeah, so it's one of those ones. It's nice, and every now and then it will hopefully come in clutch in a key moment in the combat, and I can claim that I've saved the party again.
Or when you die, you can say it's not my fault. I gave you this talisman.
Absolutely, yeah. There we go. Yeah, when we all die, I can blame everyone because they didn't use it.
Right, so level 2 skill feat.
Yeah, level 2 skill feat is I took Bargain Hunter, which basically is, I won't go into too much detail on it because I can't see it's one we're going to use a ton, but it essentially allows me to earn income during downtime using diplomacy. I think we sort of said we're not going to go too much into the skills, but just for awareness, is diplomacy is kind of the skill I'm leaning into heaviest with Lupin. He's cool. Ultimately he's a trader. He's going to be being able to to talk to people and get people on board and initiate conversations and confidence. That's his thing. And
what I will say, for this being a 3-book adventure, there are going to be plenty of opportunities for downtime.
Excellent. Yeah, actually that's, again, sort of slight peek behind it. It's not something that's really come up all that much in the campaigns we've run. Plaguestone was obviously, we were all very new to the system. Extinction Curse it's not great for downtime. It's very much a roller coaster ride where you're running from one thing to the other, and you're spending a lot of your time in low-level settlements where there's not really much point.
That's true, and I think also to counter that slightly, Extinction Curse you could have spent far more downtime in there, but because, again, we weren't so familiar with the rules, and when you're playing once a week, you do want to kind of get into it a bit, you want the story to move on, whereas I think with the podcast, being a slightly more shorter episodes, but weekly, there's going to be interesting story beats, and you guys are far more well equipped now to role play downtime rather than just, I want to take a week to do diplomacy for this, what skill can I use? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I can tell you now, downtime will 100% be a part of this adventure, and I look forward to getting back into that.
So yeah, moving on to level 3, it's the first general feat, and it's very, very boring, but I have taken toughness, because ultimately, ultimately I'm a martial. Yeah, I'm a martial character. I'm gonna need the hit points. As touched on, I think we are quite squishy as a group, so I think that's an important one, that we make sure we've got access to as much HP as we possibly can.
You don't have to explain your toughness. Everyone's tried to, but let's just say you don't want your character to die. We can all agree with that. And a boost to your reflex saves, of course.
Yes, it's a sort of part of the wider thaumaturge.
Okay.
Okay, so level 4. I've taken Breach Defenses, and what that is it essentially modifies / sort of boosts my Exploit Vulnerability skill. So to read directly from the text is, you can, when you succeed at Exploit Vulnerability, you learn about the highest of the creature's resistances that can be bypassed. So to use an example is, if I was fighting a werewolf, and that werewolf had resistance 10 to physical damage, but weakness 10 to silver, or resistance 10 except silver, or whatever, I would learn that when I succeed at the Exploit Vulnerability check. In addition to that, I also get because when you do Exploit Vulnerability, you get 2 benefits. Probably better we don't cover those here, just to avoid too much confusion. Probably better we cover that once we start using it live. But it also, effectively, this allows me to use Exploit Vulnerability to make my weapons bypass that resistance regardless. So if I was using my sword cane and I identified, hey, this creature is weak to silver, it wouldn't matter if my weapon was silver or not. I would still bypass the weapon resistance or the damage resistance as if it was silver.
Okay. I think I understand. Just as a general, again, probably one for combat, but Exploit Vulnerability is something you already had as a thaumaturge.
Yes.
And that is going to show you their weaknesses.
Yes.
And once you've succeeded at that, this Breached Defenses allows you to also learn about the resistances and then potentially bypass those resistances.
Yep. Exactly.
And is that just you or your party as well, or can you share that with some feats and stuff?
That is just me, but I would imagine that there is no reason that I couldn't. I could tell them, hey, it's weak to silver, but I can't pass the Breach Defenses thing on to someone.
No, you could tell them also that they are resistant to slashing, for example.
Yeah, but I couldn't give them the breach defense item where their weapons would also bypass that resistance regardless of whether they were.
No, but the knowledge you're learning is something you can share, unless you've been silenced. So I'm just adding the silence spell. Okay, level 4, that's your class feat. What about your skill feat?
Skill feat, I took Intimidating Glare, always a useful one to have. You know, it is high charisma character, and I suspect there will probably be the odd occasion where I'm going to, you know, have an action sitting around at the end of a turn. It's just a useful one to have, I think.
Very cool. Okay, so really interesting feat there, and I'm sure that will become more prevalent as we play. Level 5 Thaumaturge.
So a level 5 Thaumaturge is the ancestry feat. First and foremost is I took a half elf feat here. So I took Supernatural Charm. So the elven magic in my blood manifests as a force I can use to become more appealing or alluring. I can cast first level charm as an arcane innate spell once a day.
Very cool. Yep.
Hopefully one we won't need too much, bearing in mind our party is very charisma heavy, but it's always a useful one to have just on the off chance.
Maybe out of combat, it's more of a useful one.
Yeah, absolutely. Level 5 is a particularly cool level for the Thaumaturge because I get access to my second implement.
Ah, so we've got the amulet.
Absolutely. And at level 5, I will take the mirror as my second implement.
Okay.
The mirror is really, really cool. What it essentially lets me do is I can spend an action to project another version of myself onto the battlefield.
Right.
So it's probably going to be easiest and least confusing if I read this verbatim.
Okay.
So you reflect an illusory image of yourself into another unoccupied space within 15 feet that you can see. You are treated as being in both spaces until the start of your next turn. For example, you can attack, seek, and provide flanking even with yourself.
Whoa.
You occupy both spaces and your mirror self mimics your actions exactly, but any effects you generate come from only one of your positions. So I could basically swing an attack, and both versions of Lupin would swing the attack, but obviously I would only roll one set of dice. I'm not doubling my actions. It's not that powerful.
Wow. GM's nightmare, so more tokens on the battlefield.
Absolutely. I know how much you enjoy that, yeah. That's deliberately why I picked it.
Good.
What the effective downside of this is that there are two versions of me on the battlefield. So is your creatures can also attack that version, and I will still take the damage. So it's kind of similar how the summoner works.
An Eidolon, yeah.
So is effectively there are two of me, and they share the same, same health. Obviously, with area effects like Fireball, I still only roll once. I still only. Yeah,
very similar to an Eidolon in that respect. But the flanking with yourself seems like a very cool image.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very, very cool. Very, very useful. And even cooler as well is that when the mirror self disappears or moves out of its space, you choose which one is the real one. So what I could do is I could effectively use it to teleport 15 feet. As I'm standing on one platform, I use the mirror, teleport to another platform 15 feet away, and then that version moves, and then the old version that was on the first platform, he just disappears, and that new one is the real me now.
Wow, okay. I think I understand.
Yeah.
It sounds very Jumper Matrix.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
sounds
one
cool,
of
though.
one of
That's
those
something
ones.
That's not something we've come across before in combat. We've dealt with Eidolons, and we've had annual companions a little bit. That one didn't last very long. Sorry, Chris. But having additional tokens, which are not just Eidolons, but can also do abilities, which it seems like it can, is a really cool thing. So this is part of the mirror implement.
Yes, so that's the mirror implement's sort of whole shtick.
Nice.
It lets you use that. It's going to be, again, I'm sort of hoping very, very useful in terms of providing, because it is something, again, I think as a group, we've not always been great with it. We're getting a lot better at it, in fairness, but it is sort of flanking and doing things like that to try and get the AC down.
Yes.
So
which ties into when there's a creature 3 levels higher and his AC seems high, my counter to that is you've got to work on getting that AC down rather than just going on your usual, well, I stroll up and hit.
Yeah, absolutely.
More tactics involved. Sounds really cool, Jason.
That is it for level 5. Sorry, I just had to double check there. So there's a lot of text here. onto level 6, and for the class feat, I have taken Scroll Esoterica. So this one's sort of quite simple. Is I get 2 free scrolls a day. So is during my daily prep, I can create a single temporary scroll containing a 1st level spell of any tradition, and then at 8th level, which obviously I am, is I can add a 2nd temporary scroll containing a 2nd level spell. So nothing spectacular, but obviously bearing in mind the Thaumaturge class DC thing, which is very useful. Lets me
which is also
effectively
a prerequisite for this feat. So the scroll DC things we've talked about, it obviously leads to this.
Yeah, but there's also, there's some really useful low level spells. Is even at level 1 a scroll like I don't know, air bubble. It's something you're never gonna, if you're a prepared caster like a wizard, you're probably never going to be running around with that in your. You're not going to prepare that daily unless you knew you were going into a specific situation. But it's a really good spell to have access to when you suddenly get swallowed. Yeah. Or, or something like that.
Scroll of knock or something at 2nd level.
Yeah, 2nd level you start to get, it's things like hideous laughter, which is amazing. It just basically, hey, this enemy doesn't have reactions anymore. That's good against a fucking level 10 enemy, level 20 enemy.
All of your Harrow cards, Jason. Just making notes. Hideous laughter. Got it. Yeah, no, really cool. And it's a nice continuation. And I'd imagine from a character viewpoint, this is a guy who's been trading these items. He's probably picked up the spells, the scrolls. He started dabbling. And as he's got stronger, he's like, oh, but what if I could actually make my own?
Or even just a case of, he's rifling through his items and going, there's a scroll here. It's just this, I love the idea that he's just got this absolute just TARDIS full of junk.
Yeah, he's like a walking filing cabinet of scrolls.
Yeah.
Cool, okay.
And then, the skill feat, it's not a tremendously exciting one, but I've taken Glad Hand. So first impressions are definitely Lupin's strong point. So when he meets someone in a casual or social situation, I can immediately attempt a diplomacy check to make an impression, rather than needing to converse for a minute. So it's probably not something we're going to come across mechanically tremendously often.
You say that, but what I'm saying, just to jump in, is that you with diplomacy, with charisma-led characters, that definitely leads to more diplomatic or charisma-based skills, which are usually diplomacy, intimidation, whatever, making impressions. When you've got a party that's built around some of that stuff, whether you chose to or not, that can lead to the more interesting resolution of a combat as well. Yeah. The ability to make an impression immediately, potentially during combat, or something like that, where it's appropriate, that is really interesting, I think, character point that we've not had in the party before. Yeah.
I think it's situational, but it's one that could potentially be useful. I think I always feel like there's a bit of a missed opportunity with the skill feats in terms of Pathfinder 2e. There's a lot of dead wood in there, and I think there's a lot of stuff that there certainly feels like there's room for more interesting options. Okay, I think some of that is just. Because we've only ever really played adventure paths, and some adventure paths are going to lean heavier into some stuff than others, and I just think it's just been a case that maybe the adventure paths we've played so far have been ones that have been less towards skills and maybe more towards feats and combat and things like that. So,
and I would just back that up though again with what I've said before. In the past, combat is probably the easiest part of Pathfinder when you're new to the system. So, playing a very role play heavy scenario such as Night of the Grey Death, where diplomacy and chatting has been a real integral part, I think that's something that's going to fall on you guys, and you will find ways to use these feats because you're far more comfortable in those situations.
Quite
I think
possibly.
It's really interesting. I really like that one. Okay.
So on to level 7. That's another big level for the Thaumaturge. I'll start with the general feat. So I've taken Prescient Planner. Probably this specific feat isn't quite as good as what it gives you access to the next time round, which is Prescient Consumable, which is the really cool one. But Prescient Planner just basically is I can take 1 minute to remove my backpack and then carefully remove an item I hadn't previously declared, so I can pull it out of hammer space and just go. But it must be a piece of adventuring gear, can't be a weapon, armor, alchemical item, potion, magic item, etc. So it's got to be something like a crowbar, or something like that.
Or a piece of rope that you didn't have, or a flint and steel, or a telescope that you might need, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
really
just
cool.
it's a useful one. Is that say the more cool version of this, I think, which is the next step up in the feat ladder, is Prescient Consumable, which basically lets you do that with potions.
What level is that?
I want to say it's like level 11 or 13 or something like that. I'm not 100% sure, 7. To be honest.
Prescient Consumable. Yeah. It's just you've taken it at that level.
I took toughness at 3 that I didn't have access to.
Yeah, so when you get another general feat, you'll be able to take it.
And annoyingly for me, I didn't, because I took something different at 11, but we'll cover that in a second.
We can always retcon. All right, cool. I really like that.
So, yeah, what I now get at level 7 is I get Implement Adept. So what that basically means is I've deepened my connection to one of my implements, unlocking its Adept power. So I choose between the amulet and the mirror, and I basically get the next level of what it can do. So obviously the amulet at its basic level, I could give, I think it was
the resistances,
my level
damage.
Plus whatever.
Yep.
So the Adept benefit is it offers continued protection. So when I use it, whoever I use it on, whether that's me or an ally, chooses one type of damage dealt by that attack. So if, for example, it was slashing damage, they can only choose slashing. If it was slashing and fire, they could choose one or the other. But they gain resistance 5 against that damage until the start of my next turn.
Really cool.
So again, that's probably maybe more useful for creatures that are making multiple attacks in a turn, or where we're facing lots of creatures who have similar attacks.
Does that party member, how far away do they have to be from you in order to give that resistance?
I believe it's 15 feet.
Okay, so potentially,
close, and again,
far enough for there to be a problem that you are having to try and help with.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say sort of quote unquote champion range. Is with the champion's reactions and whatever. It will be just far enough that when we really need it, I'll be 5 feet too far. That's the way it normally works.
Well, that is down to you for battlefield placements and not cursing the game for being 20 feet away.
So yeah, that's a really, really useful one. Really, really useful one to have. I think, again, bearing in mind we're going to want a little bit more resistance to some of the damage.
Very good.
Also, I get Resolve at this level, so is my proficiency rank for will saves increases.
Yes.
But more interestingly is when I roll a success, I get a critical success on will saves.
These are a real 2E thing. I think they do exist in 1E. I seem to remember the evasion for the reflex saves and stuff. They are a bit nasty for a GM, but I guess it is just part of it, because I'm not looking at the other character sheets now, but if you're all high in will, for example, then when something else comes up, and you're all going to be accustomed to it, and that is kind of what I'm seeing in this party. There's some real strengths, but there are definitely some holes. But that is interesting party composition, Yeah, and it's how do you mitigate that, not with your feats, but knowing you've got those holes and then being able to buy consumables or your talismans or whatever it is, Matty spells.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I know certainly I've always, in pretty much every other group we've run, I've always been the last to pick my class, because I'm not fussy about what I play. I really don't care. So what I generally do is I'll let the others pick and then go, right, where are our gaps? And I'll pick, that's how I ended up as the monk in that. That's how I ended up as the wizard in Night of the Grey Death.
As the cleric.
Yeah, it's pretty much every character I've played has had, I think, at least a multi-classing cleric. Whereas this time, I didn't do that. I put the flag in the ground very early and said, I'm going to be a thaumaturge. And then it's up to the rest of the group to say, we're going to build around that. I think, what we will probably find is that there will be some combats that should be really, really difficult and that we'll absolutely breeze through. And I think there will be other combats that are relatively, that should be relatively routine, that are going to give us some real problems, especially, something that is maybe looking at what we've got, something that you need to put a lot of magic, like offensive magic into. I could see that giving us some problems.
We'll wait till the end of your character build, but I have some thoughts on that as well. So boost your will saves at level 7 and weapon specialization. Yep. We won't go into that now, but I'm sure that's relevant for your weapon of choice. So
moving on.
Level 8.
Level 8, this is relatively standard, so it's class feat and skill feat. For the class feat, I have taken Cursed Effigy. So this is my last. This is essentially a bonus, not a bonus because I still have to spend an action for it, but it's something I can do after a successful attack. So as I've landed a successful strike against the target, strike dealt physical damage. Mm-hmm. After that attack, I can spend an action to grab a bit of blood, cut some hair, or grab a chunk of the creature, whatever it is.
Esoterica?
Yes, absolutely. Esoterica. Yep. And I effectively make a mini voodoo doll out of it.
Ooh, cool.
And that makes it harder for that creature to resist my ability. So as long as I have that creature with exploited vulnerability, it takes a -2 status penalties to its saving throws against Thaumaturge abilities or items that use my Thaumaturge class DC. So what I'm thinking there is that dovetails very, very nicely with my ability to use the Thaumaturge class DC with scrolls. So I'm gonna maybe get into combat, cut a chunk off this very, very nasty creature that's maybe got very, very good saving throws, cut a chunk off it, put that in the voodoo doll, and now I can not only use hopefully my Thaumaturge class DC, which will hopefully be higher than whatever the DC was anyway, they're also taking a pretty significant penalty to it.
And if you're pulling a scroll out that you've got handy, one of your ones you've made for the day, etc., it all stacks.
Exactly.
Love it. Yeah, really love it. And I hope to see some cool descriptions of when you're grabbing this piece of blood, cut hair, or other piece of the creature's body. That could be fun against a bloody ooze or something. Yeah,
absolutely. You're just grabbing a melon baller and just scooping something out of it.
Cool. So that was Cursed Effigy.
Yes, and then for the skill feat, I've taken Shameless Request. So basically, this sort of ties into, again, this very bold, sort of brazen merchant character that Lupin is. I can downplay the consequences or outrageousness of my requests using sheer brazenness and charm. So when I request something, I reduce the DC or any DC increases of making an outrageous request by 2. And if I roll a critical failure, I get a failure instead. So what that means is I can never, I believe if you really badly fail a request, you can basically cause someone's attitude towards you to change negatively.
Okay.
So is what this will effectively do is it lowers the risk of making those ridiculous requests. It allows me, I suppose, a little bit to go crit fishing with diplomacy almost. Hey, Mr. Shopkeeper, you really, really, really do want to give me that magic item at a 50% discount, don't you? Wink, wink, and go from there. So
request is not a feat that we have used ever.
No, not really.
But noted. I really like the idea of it. The request action is a diplomacy skill action. You make a request and you base it based on their current attitude. And what this is doing is allowing you to make far more outrageous requests, but without some of the penalties and with the bonus to the check itself.
Yeah, basically.
Nice. All right, level 9. I've got I can smell something for level 9. What's happening at level 9, Jason?
Is it saltpeter and gunpowder by any chance?
It is, and it's the smell of multi-class.
It is. I hadn't intended on multi-classing Lupin is, and to be honest, I still don't massively intend on doing it. Basically,
whatever you say here is now written down in stone and can't be changed.
is at level 9, you get an ancestry feat, and I had a look through the options that were there, and there was nothing. There was nothing I was particularly excited about. It's a bit of a blank spot for both sort of elf and human. So I ended up taking the human feat multi-talented, which, to cut a long story short, gives you a free dedication feat for any class.
We've got this with I don't know if you've listened to it yet, but Camone's taken this at a level to give him a third multi-class into the sorcerer bloodline.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So yeah, I had a look at the various classes that were available, and there wasn't anything again sort of that I felt I was going to get a tremendous amount of value out of, except I thought, Gunslinger looks interesting. One, because I have the feat that lets me, reload with the free hand, and looking at it is I was a little bit.
You took that at level 1 when you didn't have anything to reload.
Yeah, I was using a crossbow up till then.
Okay.
So yeah, I sort of looking at the class makeup we have is as I was a little bit concerned about our ability to do damage at range.
Yeah,
and also just is as well is just having a reliable other option for a weapon. Is Lupin's main weapon. I don't think I'd actually covered this up to now, is a sword cane.
Okay.
So it is again nice concealable weapon, but it's mechanically it does a reasonable amount of damage.
Sure.
But from the gunslinger point of view, I've taken a dueling pistol. So the idea is that Lupin is he's heavily armed, but he might not appear so at first glance. A very, very key aspect of a merchant. You want to have the weapons there, but you don't want them showing because you might scare away the customers.
Well, yeah, I'd imagine seeing a gun. Now, look, obviously, probably the most famous gunslinger is Baron from GCP.
Obviously,
that was a 1E gunslinger. He managed to survive, 500 episodes, whatever it was.
Something like that. It was crazy, yeah.
Troy, not the biggest fan. I have not dug into gunslingers. It is an uncommon class.
Yes.
Which I'm okay with. It's a multi-class. Had you wanted to do this at the start, then we'd have had a conversation. So I don't know very much about it. And what I will say is, as long as you've got your shit down, I don't almost want to know that much about that part. And I think as long as mechanically you understand how it works and it makes sense, and I genuinely think it makes sense for a traveling merchant who's been trading goods that gets this fucking gun. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
is realistically, I'm not intending, and obviously, plans can always change depending on, we could lose 2 characters in the first session and have a completely different party makeup by the time, we get into session 2, but have a completely different group by that point.
But don't tempt fate. Well, literally, don't tempt fate. You can't tempt fate.
But my plan was this was really very much a case of, look, I've got to take something. Gunslinger seems kind of cool, and it gives me access to a cool weapon. I'm just going to take this.
And so you get to choose a gunslinger's way, which is a bit like your implement. So
yes, so he's again with a dedication. You don't really get. It's really just you have to pick one at this point. But you don't actually get any benefit from it until you take additional feats, which I'm not really planning. Especially, I'm not going to be wasting high level feats on taking low level gunslinger feats. It just doesn't make sense. More interestingly, at level 9 is I get the ability to intensify vulnerability.
This ties into your exploit vulnerability, which is
once around, when I'm already benefiting from exploit vulnerability, I can see the subject, haven't used it this round already, I can basically wave my amulet or mirror or whatever it is at the creature, and I can cause whatever vulnerability it's suffering from, I can basically magnify it. Do you want to go into what the amulets and mirrors are at this point, or do you want to just deal with them as and when they come up?
I would say, let's leave those for now. It's as a general kind of consensus of what it is, it boosts your existing ability to find the weaknesses of a creature, and as a result will let you cause more damage for longer.
Do something cool. So I will pick the mirrors one just to illustrate, just very, very quickly. So what I essentially do is I can spend an action if I've got the mirror in my hand and I've already exploited vulnerability, or that target is already is already vulnerable to me. I can spend an action to become concealed to the target of my exploit vulnerability.
Yes.
So is that then, we know concealed is a very, very useful thing, basically 20% miss chance.
Yes.
So
would that apply use the mirror. If your mirror was out as well, would it apply to both of you?
It doesn't say, but is one of these wonderful things that Pathfinder is very, very good at. Lots and lots of rules, lots and lots of edge cases that it doesn't quite cover.
Well, we'll come into that. But
it doesn't say, but I would feel
ability.
It would. Yeah. But yeah, mechanically, for the sake of moving forward to this, it gives me an extra an extra ability with my implements.
Cool. So for the mirror, it's concealment, and for the amulet, it's let me have a look here. Sorry. So I gain a +2 status bonus to AC and saves, which is really good. Yeah,
that's effectively the equivalent to raising a shield with the amulet. So that's really powerful.
Or heightened inspired courage or whatever. That's really good.
Yeah.
Which we know that our bard is not inspiring courage so much. So
Cabana, yeah.
That was Cabana, yeah. Oh dear. Okay, right. There's 2 levels left. Level 10.
2 levels left. Yes, indeed. So at level 10, it's another class feat skill feat. So the class feat I've taken is a biggie. This one is share weakness. Mm-hmm. So as I'm exploiting a creature's vulnerability using mortal weakness. Now we've not really covered mortal weakness. Yeah, no. It's one of the 2 things you get as a result of exploit vulnerability.
Okay.
So mortal weakness is... Sorry, I'm scrolling to find it here because I've got a ton of stuff up here.
Just while you're looking, this is all tied to this exploit vulnerability, which is Jason gets at first level. It's a 1 action. It's the recall knowledge check, which is not recall knowledge. It's using his esoteric lore check. And depending on whether he succeeds or fails, there's different things to find the weaknesses, resistances that we've already talked about. But there is another part of it, which is mortal weakness and personal antithesis. And yes. I believe this one ties into the mortal weakness.
Yeah. So to very quickly cover the mortal weakness, it basically... mortal weakness activates the highest weakness you discovered with exploit vulnerability. So if, for example, we came across a creature that was, had weakness 10 to silver, I identify that and my weapon effectively automatically does that damage. So that is mortal weakness in a nutshell. What share weakness lets me do is I've identified the mortal weakness and I can grant it to an ally. So this is now I will use is it Heinrich Kamoon's character? Wilhelm. I knew it was a German name. It's Heinrich now. He's forever Heinrich. So yeah, he is. Lupin can basically go, yep, I know this creature is weak to silver, and even though my weapon isn't silver, I will use mortal weakness to make it that way. I can now give that to Wilhelm as well.
So this ties into what we said right at the start, is when you've identified these weaknesses or resistances, there are feats coming up that allow you to share that ability with the other party members. Yeah, absolutely. Really cool.
Very cool way of boosting the damage, potentially quite significantly. If you think of, is some creatures which have, a big old stack of resistances and whatnot, but one really, really big glowing weakness, that's going to make those fights a lot less painful.
Especially maybe against golems, which I know you're a big fan of.
We won't be fighting any golems in this campaign.
I hate say golems. No more.
Hate them.
Yes. Skill feat.
Yes, so skill feat, I've taken Disturbing Knowledge. So again, I feel obviously Lupin, the amount of research he'll have done into magical items, etc., etc., etc. He'll be very well versed in occultism. So basically, this allows him to attempt an occultism check and to compare the results of the will DC of enemies within 30 feet, and essentially to try and make them frightened. So it's almost an intimidation check, but using occultism instead of intimidation.
And once you hit legendary in occultism, you can do it with any number of enemies within 30 feet.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if he lives that long, then that will be useful. Okay, cool. That's really good. And that leads us to the final starting point of Stolen Fate, level 11.
Yeah, absolutely. So is level 11 is another general feat, and instead of taking Prescient Consumable, I decided to take Incredible Investiture. That basically is very, very simple. Mechanically, it lets me invest more magic items. I can now invest 12 instead of 10. So cool. I think, bearing in mind Lupin's background and the fact that I probably will be digging quite heavily into various magic items, etc., 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 it's probably a good idea to have access to as many as I possibly can.
Possibly a deck of incredibly powerful artifact cards that have abilities, etc. Then I imagine that's
something like that. Yeah,
just on the off chance that happens. Cool. All right, Incredible Investiture. What else happens at 11?
At 11, I get the I get the adept benefit of my second implement.
So this is the upgrade. You took Amulet before.
Yes. Yep, so this one now is Mirror, so I get the upgrade to Mirror. This one, essentially, when my Mirror self is damaged, or basically, so either one of them, I can choose which one of these this applies to, that version explodes into mirror shards. What it essentially does is an enemy attacks, deals damage. I can say, right, I'm triggering Mirror's reflection, and that reflection explodes, deals slashing damage to all creatures in a 5-foot emanation around where that version of me was. The damage is relatively low. It's 2 plus half my level, or the damage of triggering attack, whichever is lower. But it's very useful if you've got a big group of enemies all around you and you want to get decent amount of damage into all of them at once.
You send your Mirror in, it gets hit, it explodes, it deals and it can also hurt your allies as well,
presumably. Yes, but I'm not going to be within 5 feet of my allies. Why would I be within 5 feet of my allies?
Your Mirror might be. Cool. All right, that's really cool.
And that's what a Lupin Malus looks like at level 11.
Wow. What a character. Thaumaturge sounds like a really cool class.
It's a really, really interesting class, and it is a lot more simple than we've probably made it sound here. It's one of those ones when you do the initial reading, it looks really, really complicated. But actually, once you get your head around it, it is very, very simple. It's essentially just a martial character with a bit of range over the hunt prey, and then also with a few cool items on top.
But rather than leading with, say, strength to get the numbers there, it's relying on the ability to use this exploit vulnerability with the esoteric lore to find the weaknesses, find the resistances, and manipulate those. So where maybe you don't have the numbers on your stats, you're getting it in other ways. Yeah, absolutely. Is my damage is not coming from, to compare to a fighter or something like that, is my damage is not coming from rolling d10s, rolling d12s, things like that. Is I'm not doing that stuff. And I'm not doing like a ranger or a monk would, whereas I'm doing 4 or 5 attacks a turn and dealing damage that way. So I'm dealing maybe 1 or 2 attacks a turn. But those attacks are creating and exploiting weaknesses and vulnerabilities and getting the additional damage that way. And quick question, with regards to your implements, can you have one in each hand? Would that be possible? I mean, it doesn't say that you can't, that I'm aware of in my reading. I don't know how you deal damage with that, short of doing something like a goblin that had a bite attack or something like that. But what you can do the resistance thing, give it to an ally with your feet, and then put your mirror up so that that's in the fray rather than you. So what you can do is you can you have a, let me see if I can find the exact wording, but you essentially get a free action to swap your implements to be able to use it. So what it means is I don't have to have my amulet out to be able to use that reaction. But you have to have the mirror out. Yes, but again, I can just freely swap before I use the mirrors. Before I use the mirrors one action,
So to activate the mirror costs me an action. So as the swap to it is considered a free action prior to that.
If you had no implement out, though, who knows? Quick draw.
I need to check that. I would imagine I'd have to draw it, but I would need to check that.
So thank you, Jason. There is one little nugget I would like to leave you with. We have previously played a lot of classes over a lot of hours in Pathfinder 2e, and let's say Extinction Curse, for example. One of the most overpowered feats in the game is Battle Medicine, which I think many people would agree. Not a single character has Battle Medicine in their arsenal. So I think it's going to be interesting because you guys have a lot of different ways to manipulate the battlefield, manipulate enemies, and manipulate yourselves. But if a character goes down, we
have to buy some potions, I think.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, it's that's an interesting one. I assume someone is trained in medicine.
That is an assumption we will have to leave for another time, and that is a perfect place to do so. Are you trained in medicine?
Who was the last to put their character in? Because I'm going to be having words.
Is Lupin trained in medicine?
He's not. No.
Interesting. On that note, Jason, thank you for your time this evening. I cannot wait to put Lupin along with our other PCs, and I'm thinking we might do a little pre-game chat that we might record before we do the actual first episode. But thank you for your time tonight. Sounds like a really cool character, and we'll see you for episode 1 of Stolen Fate. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.